Hello and welcome. This is NTA Tuesday Live, and I'm Cyril Stober. The state of the Nigerian economy has recently come under public scrutiny following the introduction of 4 major tax reform bills being advanced by the Tinubu presidency. Now, debates are heated while the national economic managers are engaging citizens and interest groups on the basis for the reforms. Tonight, NTA Tuesday Live will examine key components of the proposed bills currently before the National Assembly. But before we go into the discussion, let's get to see this report put together by Bosade Abel Amusu.
Committee on Tax Reforms set up by President Bola Ahmed Tinubu is to enhance revenue collection efficiency and ensure transparent reporting. First was the signing of the 4 executive orders and suspension on the 5% excise tax on telecommunication services and the excise duties escalation on locally manufactured vehicles. This is to promote the effective utilization of tax and other revenues to foster a healthy tax culture and drive voluntary compliance. 4 tax reform bills were presented to the National Assembly by the Executive for consideration. The bills are Nigerian Tax Bill 2024, which aims to establish a comprehensive fiscal framework for tax regulation. The Tax Administration Bill to provide a clear and summarizing legal structure for managing taxes in Nigeria to reduce dispute and enhance efficiency. The Nigerian Revenue Service Establishment Bill is intended to repeal the Federal Inland Revenue Service Act and create the Nigeria Revenue Service, and the Joint Revenue Board Establishment Bill proposes the creation of tax tribunal and a tax ombudsman to address tax-related matters. The importance of these bills is for effective tax system for economic development.
The laws that we have proposed before the National Assembly are very simple to operate, very simple. You can sit down and determine what is your own tax at all. And if somebody wants to cheat you, you can say, no, I can compute it by myself. These are some of the immense benefits that we have there, apart from the fact that we are also promoting ease of doing business. And that is why we are condensing all the different taxes into very few ones. Currently, according to surveys, we have over 60, 70 different types of taxes across Nigeria. Now, what this law has proposed is to reduce that to less than 10, and which I also believe is going to help to promote businesses. You can move goods and services from one place to another without any hindrance or fear of overtaxation.
The tax reform bills proposed have ignited debate. There has been unending controversy in the introduction of the tax reform bills from stakeholders and lawmakers. While these bills seek to modernize Nigeria's outdated tax laws, for some, the reform would restructure the tax net and eliminate double taxation, among others. Those against it believe the reform would stifle some businesses and state government revenue stream. What measures can be put in place to prevent revenue leakages and ensure accurate VAT collection?
So we are trying to increase tax revenue without increasing the tax burden on anyone. The poorest people will find significant reduction in their tax burden. Middle class, a little bit less reduction. Even the upper class and companies, large and small, we see a reduction in their tax burden.
Generating revenue is not a function of development anywhere in the world. So therefore, the efficient use of revenue is the financial for development.
It is hoped that the resolution of the tax reform bill's controversy will require various factors, including the present economic realities, social equity, political will, and collaborative approach that prioritizes the long-term interests of sustainable national development. In Abuja, Bosade Abel Amosu.
All right, that report sets the tone for the discussion tonight. I'd like to welcome to this program Mr. Taiwo Oyedele. As you know, he is the chairman of the Presidential Committee on Fiscal Policy and Tax Reforms. Thanks for being with us tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Stober.
It's good to see you.
All right. Same here. It's great to see you.
All right. Well, it's just about the only thing being talked about everywhere now. The debates are unheated and from all angles. So while some support the proposed bills, others have spoken against it, and so many issues have been raised from concerned groups, interested individuals, and even professionals. So let's start from this premise. Take us through what these reforms are proposing. Let's go through it so we get to see where all this is coming from.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. So I think the starting point is always to say that these bills that are now the hottest thing in town, which is maybe a first in my career in Nigeria. There was a time I read an article in, I think it was in a British journal, and they said if you want to get the attention of the nation, talk about entertainment and talk about tax. And I said, when we will get to that point in Nigeria that people pay attention to tax matters, it seems to have arrived now. So these reforms are quite broad-based, and they cut across revenue mobilization, fiscal governance, as well as economic growth and competitiveness. So we have a lot of work we've done in the area of fiscal policy, things to do with how we impose taxes, what principles should we follow, fairness, equity, convenience, economy, protecting the poor. And then those policies also cover government spending, which is really how should governments direct and utilize the resources that we have, both from taxes and from natural resources like oil and gas. And there's also the one about government borrowing. What is the ideal way to borrow? We know that the government just raised Eurobond a couple of days ago, and it was oversubscribed. So what is the framework guiding those kind of borrowing? What are we going to apply the money towards? How do we ensure that we get the best value for those borrowing? How do we ensure that the terms of the loan contract are convenient for us and also appropriate for the country? We've also done a lot of work around various regulations. So these bills fall into the category of the critical reform, which is where we are trying to rewrite the tax laws, because many of our tax laws are quite old, very, very old. Even some African countries that introduce some of the tax, like VAT now, which is one of the hottest issues with these bills. Tanzania introduced value-added tax about 2 or 3 years after we introduced ours. And a couple of years ago, they issued a brand new one. So we have been patching the one we had for over 30 years now. And that's just one example. We have the same thing across stamp duties, companies' income tax. They're quite old. So we took that decision to say, let's just repeal these laws and write new ones. And in the process, let's simplify the language. Let's try and promote equity within government and with the taxpayers, as well as ensuring that we harmonize so that the number of taxes are not too many. So all of these objectives are what led us to those 4 bills that Mr. President approved, and they went to the National Assembly, being the number 1, Nigeria Tax Bill. It's a law that shows you the major taxes you need to pay, who needs to pay, and so on and so forth. Then the second one is the Nigeria Tax Administration Bill, which is the bill that tells you how we would administer those taxes, including how we administer taxes that are collected centrally and those that are collected by subnational. Why we recognize that it's a federation and we're not taking away the powers of the subnational, but we believe that we must have a minimum standard. For example, revenue authorities at the state level are expected to be autonomous, which means they should operate professionally, be able to hire their own staff, be able to pay them appropriate remuneration, be able to fire them if they need to fire them. Because if you recall, up until 2007, the Federal Inland Revenue Service did not have autonomy and they did not perform. Once the autonomy was granted under President Obasanjo, and we had the FECO as the head of the FRS, that was when the transformation started. We've also seen that sort of transformation in places like Lagos State Internal Revenue Service, but many states are still struggling because they haven't provided the framework for them to build capacity. Therefore, they're unable to generate revenue to provide welfare and social services. So we have all of this covered in that administration bill. Then the next one is the Nigerian Revenue Service Establishment Bill, which is trying to establish the Nigerian Revenue Service to replace the Federal Inland Revenue Service with some expanded scope in terms of the work that they have to do. And the last bill is the Joint Revenue Board Establishment Bill. That's seeking to establish the Joint Revenue Board to replace the Joint Tax Board that we have today. In addition to that, that bill will then warehouse provisions around tax appeal tribunal, which helps us with dispute resolution. And finally, the tax ombudsman that it's meant to protect and advocate for taxpayers' rights, particularly small businesses that are unable to protect themselves.
Well, comprehensive. Well, these bills have generated a lot of controversy, as we noted earlier. But perhaps the one aspect of it that's gone all over is the question of value-added tax. Now, and it seems there's a lot about the VAT which a number of people are against, sections of the country are against. Two things about it. First, it would seem that many are not comfortable with the fact that from what VAT is now, there's a proposed increase, which eventually culminates in about 15%. Not many agree with that it's, it's so high, 15% from what has been paid now. And that's one aspect of it. And secondly, the question of distribution of VAT has also been so controversial, with people saying this is meant to favor one part of the country against another part, particularly mentioning the fact that this would be of advantage to Lagos, Rivers, and the FCT, while states, particularly in the northern part of the country, would be affected. Now, there's also the other aspect where people talk about certain key government agencies, which they say under these reforms that have been proposed, eventually they would be phased out. Agencies like the ones that cater to infrastructure in tertiary institutions, TED Fund, and all such. So take us through this. Let's begin with the issue of value-added tax, and why it has to go so high.
Yes.
And, right.
Thank you very much for asking about that, because I think that there has been so much focus on the distribution of VAT that we're not talking about the equally important provisions of even just that VAT law. So the rates of VAT that we have today is 7.5%. So when you buy, airtime, you buy a mobile phone, you buy a car, you go to a restaurant, you buy wines, you buy soft drinks, and the list goes on, you pay 7.5%. In paying that 7.5%, let's say it's candy, sweets like this, the person that produced it is likely to have bought a lot of inputs, including the wrap, including sugar is part of the content of this, and some other materials will go into it. The manufacturer also is likely to have equipment. They probably have a factory. They have a generator. They have vehicles for distributing those products to their distributors, and so on and so forth. In Nigeria today, what happens is that The manufacturer of these sweets is unable to get the VAT that he has paid in producing these sweets on the assets, including the whole factory setup. Is unable to get the VAT on anything to do with services, whether you procure professional services, technical services, to manage your business. The only VAT that this manufacturer can claim back is the raw materials that go into the sweets. Now, what the manufacturer will do is, since I've paid VAT and I cannot claim it back, I'll do my calculation of how much profit I need to make, add it to the cost of producing the sweet, and that's how much I'll sell it for.
Okay.
Now, this way of managing our VAT system in Nigeria creates problems because it leads to what we call cascading effect of prices, because there's a build-up from the very beginning. If it's something that comes from some raw material from the farm, the farmer cannot claim a lot of the inputs. So by the time I invoice you for these sweets, you see 7.5% VAT on it. But what you don't see is the other hidden VAT that the manufacturer has not been able to claim back and therefore has added to the build-up of the costs. Now, we now said this is not good for us as a country, particularly if you are looking for manufacturers and industries to set up in your location. Because what's happening today is if I want to set up a factory to produce mobile phones and I have the choice between Nigeria and Ghana, if it's going to cost me 100 million naira to set up that factory without taxes, in Nigeria, after paying the 100 million, I'll pay 7.5 million for VAT. In Ghana, I'll pay that 100 million and I'll pay 17.5 million for VAT. But the good news is that in Ghana, you get the 17.5 million back from the government. So effectively, you've invested 100 million to set up your factory. In Nigeria, you do not get the 7.5 million back. So you get a little bit of deductions that equate to about 30%, but let's leave that for that purpose of simplicity. So this factory cost me 107.5 million in Nigeria to put up. I'm going to be asking myself, shouldn't I just go to Ghana, produce there under the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement and ECOWAS Treaty? I can always sell to Nigeria. So Nigeria is not competitive. We are losing investment to other places. So part of these reforms in the bills before the National Assembly is to allow those manufacturers to claim all the inputs on their costs. So that brings down their costs significantly.
All right. Let me ask you to pause a while here. Let's introduce another of our guests who joins us via Zoom. Professor Uche Waleke is a Director, Institute of Capital Market Studies, Nasarawa State University. Prof, thank you for joining us. I do believe that you've heard Mr. Taiwo Uyedele speak of the aspects of these bills that have become so controversial. However, you also been part of society, must have listened to arguments on both sides, back and forth, on the desirability or otherwise of these reforms, and particularly the bills. Let's hear your views to start with, and how do you rate all the arguments, the debates about it, to be or not to be?
Well, thank you so much, Cyril. Let me also thank you for inviting me to this program. Let's even look at it this way. You can't be doing something the same way, all the time, and you're expecting a different outcome. First, let me note that the arguments are healthy for our economy, because at the end of the day, it's encouraging more engagements, for people to understand the justification for the reforms. Now, the reforms are necessary, no doubt. I've just said here now that you can't be doing something all the time and you expect a different outcome. What is not in doubt is that our current tax structure is not helping the economy at all. A tax structure in which small businesses can't breathe. if you look at I'm sure you have also been following even the GDP numbers released by the National Bureau of Statistics. Okay, look at the last number, where manufacturing, has been on the decline. Just came in at 0.9%. Ditto for agriculture. The productive sectors of the economy are really experiencing weak, growth, partly on account of the tax system, the tax structure, that we have. Today, small businesses are not finding it easy, and part of what the reforms, seek to do is to, enable small businesses in particular, to grow, such that you don't end up taxing, if you like, seeds. Taiwo usually happens to be the chairman of the committee. Let me even say this, I'm sure, perhaps you're not aware. I'm also a member of that committee, and of course, my views here are personal to me. He always reminds us each time we had this meeting about the need to tax fruits. Okay, something, of course, the president has always said, and not seeds. About the need not to tax poverty. So again, the reforms are meant to encourage small business. The reforms are also meant to protect the vulnerable. If you also look at our ranking in terms of cost of ease of doing business, 131 out of 190 countries. Part of that too, one of the pillars for ease of doing business is tax. Our tax system, unfortunately, is not something that you can describe as fair. Our tax system doesn't meet many of the principles of a good tax system. A good tax system ought to be simple. A good tax, and that is why you find that one of the things the reforms seek to do is to also unify the multiplicity of taxes that you have today. It's said that we'll have officially about 60 different taxes and levies collected by the tiers of government, and unofficially over 200. The whole idea behind the reforms is to unify them to a single digit. So a good tax system ought to be simple. A good tax system ought to be fair and equitable. Okay, which of course the philosophy behind even the VAT that we are talking about. Okay, and then of course a good tax system ought to be certain. People need to know what they have to pay. Okay, that is not what we have today. So the reforms are being driven by these philosophies, by these principles of a good tax system. Now, at the end of the day, you will now find that it will rub off positively, on the economy, particularly from the point of view of small businesses. Now, for the personal income tax, for example, the income earners, going forward, by the bills will no longer pay tax. So anybody earning below 800,000 naira per annum, for example, becomes exempt. For small businesses, we also know that for businesses that are not getting up to 50 million naira, the threshold has been moved from 25 million naira to 50 million naira, will also be exempted from tax. Now, on the vexed issue of VAT, the value tax. And by the way, let me even also say this: our tax system is not competitive. The current tax system is not competitive. Some time ago, I wrote an article that was published in Business Day, where I said I argued for realigning the tax mix in favor of consumption tax. Our current tax system is heavily tilted towards direct tax, and part of what the reforms have done now is to tilt them towards consumption tax, which is why the part of the current 30% for large businesses to later businesses. Okay. I'm talking to you now from Cairo. I'm talking to you now and in Egypt, for example, companies' income tax is just 22.5%. In Ghana, it is 25%. So all around us, we find that companies' income tax, so all our taxes are lower. All right. Yes, admittedly, VAT is higher. Okay, and Taiwo has just told you that even where it is higher, it works way it ought to work. People, those who pay input VAT, are entitled to recover them, unlike what we have in Nigeria. So, in summary, I think the reforms are good. I think the reforms, should be supported by all the stakeholders. And it's also important to emphasize that at the end of the day, the subnationals, especially the states would be what's up, as a result of implementing the reforms. Thank you.
All right, we'll return to you in just a moment. We'll try and do something about the echo and the hurlback that we are hearing. We'll clean up the Zoom connections and we'll get back to you. But let me come back to Mr. Taiwo Yedili right here in the studio. Now, you've just explained a bit about VAT and how it works out. And then, of course, the big question would be, we do hear this all the time, that rates are the lowest in Nigeria. But the question has always been, there are other parameters, there are other things that are on ground that drive these rates. And Nigeria, these things are not taken into consideration. So why would you, for instance, want to jack up from 7.5% up to 15%?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, so that's why I was trying to explain first the principle of how the VAT works today versus what is being proposed in those bills. So the first one is that manufacturers and producers of anything pay VAT and they are unable to recover it. So that increases their cost and they pass it on to customers. Okay. Number two is that we have a lot of consumptions that carry the burden of VAT and they shouldn't, like food, like education, like health, and some other products. These are the areas where majority of our people, the masses, this is where they spend almost their entire household income. Based on the data from Bureau of Statistics, the average household in Nigeria spends more than 50% of their income just on food. If you go down the ladder of society, they tend to spend close to 100% just trying to eat. So we're saying, why don't you remove the VAT from those essential consumptions? So number one, allow businesses to claim their VAT back so their costs can come down. Number two, take away VAT from the majority of what people consume. From the data that we use, 82% of consumptions will not carry VAT. Only 18%, that's 4 in every 5 consumption will not have VAT. 1 in 5 will have VAT. Now, once you have done that, if you don't adjust the VAT rate upwards, we will crash government revenue significantly. Many of them will struggle to pay salaries. We don't want to solve one problem and create a bigger one. So the idea, therefore, is that if the average household in Nigeria, or let's say the masses, you've protected them from what they normally consume and you've taken VAT away, the rest of us that are not so poor, that we have extra money to buy smartphones, brand new cars, we buy wines, expensive one, maybe we should pay a little bit more so that there can be money to still run government while we are protecting the poorest people. Interestingly, because someone brought out, once you get into public service, people try and dig out things. Someone brought out something today that I shared on Twitter in 2019.
Exactly. We're going to ask you that,
okay.
where you argued against increasing
the VAT rate. Yes.
And suddenly, a few years down the line, here you are proposing
an increase. Yes, so that's a very good observation. So interestingly, I was also on the committee set up by the government at that time to work on the finance bills. And at that committee, this conversation came up about Nigeria has one of the lowest VAT rates in the world. In fact, I remember being at a meeting where we had the IMF, and they said, your rate is one of the lowest in the world. I said, no, our rate looks like it's one of the lowest in the world, but it is not one of the lowest in the world. Because when you ask me to pay 7.5%, but I cannot claim back a lot of my costs, it feels like 12 or 15%, even though it's only 7.5%. And one of the things I proposed at that meeting is that we should not raise VAT rates until we're able to do the full reforms that ensures that businesses do not carry input VAT, poor people don't pay VAT on food and education and health. So I made that argument. Of course, the government was not willing at the time. So that was why I expressed my own view to say that if you raise VAT without those reforms, you will create inflation and create unemployment. Now that we have the opportunity for a holistic reform, that we are exempting poor people from paying VAT, we are exempting, because that's what it means, businesses from the burden of VAT, and we're only just putting VAT on the non-essential consumption, mostly consumed by middle class, upper class, and the high net worth individuals, then this would not create inflation. So it's not being inconsistent. It's different scenarios under different circumstances.
Okay. That is as far as that is concerned. But then, now the question of the sharing, which is the most talked about.
Yes.
Where it's been said that certain parts is going to be advantageous for certain areas of the country, and it's going to be a huge disadvantage for other areas. How do you reconcile that?
Yes. So again, I think the starting point is that today, the way VAT revenue is distributed, we have the vertical distribution, which is 15% to the federal government, 50% to states, and 35% to local governments. Now, that 50% of the state and 35% of the local government is further distributed horizontally. And in doing so, 20% is based on derivation, which is attribution. 50% is based on equality of states, and 30% is based on population. This current model that we have is such that attribution for the purpose of derivation is skewed or lopsided in favor of head office location. That is inequity. That in itself is unfairness, if you want to describe it, because you make calls in Kano and the credit is given to Lagos State. You buy cement in Ekiti and the credit is given to Lagos State. You supply anything to oil companies, the credit is given to Rivers State. It doesn't matter where the person who is doing that is based, and so on and so forth. So that's one thing. The current system of distribution is inequitable. The second point is that a couple of states, particularly Rivers State and Lagos State, are in court because they believe that VAT is a sales tax, it's consumption tax, and therefore should be the tax administered by the state. So they won up to the Court of Appeal, and then the federal government appealed, and now they are at the Supreme Court, and it's pending there. So we identified two problems that we needed to solve. One is address the inequity that you have now. Number two is discourage any state from trying to get a judgment at the Supreme Court to administer VAT as a state tax. Because we've seen two judgments, one very recently, a couple of weeks ago, about lottery, gaming, and the Supreme Court said, well, it's not the business of the federal government, it's within the purview of the states. Before then, we saw the judgment on hotel, hospitality, and tourism. Supreme Court said the same thing. Said this is not the business of the federal government, it's within the purview of the state. Why? What is common to those two judgments is that in the Constitution, they were not specifically mentioned. And if something is not specifically mentioned in the Constitution, it's considered to be a residual matter for the subnational to deal with. VAT is not mentioned in our Constitution. So we are worried that one state will get a Supreme Court judgment, and there will be no opportunity for debate or negotiation. It will become 100% derivation, because every state will collect it and keep the money to themselves. They will not share with anyone. So our own recommendation says, correct how this derivation is attributed to states, so that it will be attributed to states going forward based on consumption that happen within the territory of each state. That's number one. Number two, once that has been done, allow every state to keep 60% of what they have generated from their territory. Put the 40% into the pool so we can share it. 20% equality, 20% population. We were not expecting that this would be controversial. We thought that we'll have the biggest struggle with Lagos State, because they're the biggest beneficiary of the current method. For 2023, it shows that about 80% of VAT in Nigeria was credited and attributed to Lagos State. So we had extensive engagement with Lagos State. We did not have extensive engagement with the other states, because we were very clear based on our proposal that they should be very happy and commend our efforts. But we were surprised the way this has played out. But maybe it's good for the system. At least now people are paying attention to these reforms.
All right. Let's go back to Professor Owaleke. And still talking about the question of VAT, where do you think the discontent and the concerns are coming from with this?
Well, you mentioned it. It has to do with Section 77. Section 77 of the bill that talks about derivation. Of course, you know, currently derivation is 20%, equality 50%, and then population 20%. But the committee recommended moving that from 20% to 60%. Some persons have also tried to equate it with the derivation that comes, from oil, and they've argued, why is that of the oil 13%, and then this one is being moved from 20 to 60%? Okay, so that's where the real issue is, coming from. But I wouldn't know whether the chairman of the committee mentioned it in his submissions, that yes, the current formula, of course, we know is 15%. If FG keeps 15%, and then 85% is taken to subnationals, 50 to states, and 35 to the local government. But what is being recommended now is the FG should just return 10%, so 5% of that will now also be taken to subnationals. But I wouldn't know whether he has mentioned it, that in making this recommendation, that the committee also had at the back of its mind the possibility that a state, could, at the end of the day, have something that is lower than what it currently has. Well, that is in the unlikely event that happens, that the 5%, which the federal government is now going to relinquish, can serve as an equalization fund, to also use to ensure that no state is worse off, at the end of the day. So the expectation,
that some states would eventually get lower than they do now. What could lead to that? If, for instance, we say, right, okay.
In the unlikely event that happens, okay. Now, just as the chairman rightly explained, the attribution would now be based on consumption and no longer on the basis of the headquarters effect, that Lagos State now, currently enjoys. Okay, so if it is going to be based on consumption, it's expected that a lot, states will actually benefit because consumption takes place virtually everywhere. Okay, but where that happens, I know I said in the likely event that you have a state now maybe having less from VAT as opposed to what you used to have. Okay, the suggestion is that there should be something like an equalization fund. Maybe the chairman will throw more light on that. That can be used to also compensate those states. So at the end of the day, okay, the whole idea is to make sure that no state is worse off by the new arrangement. Okay, so it's expected that all the states, will be better off if the new VAT sharing formula, the new VAT arrangement, is implemented. So I think no state should have any reason to fear, especially having in mind that there is something called an equalization fund that is being provided to ensure that no state suffers.
Yeah, all right. Well, that's one of the biggest fears, that some states are going to be earning less once this goes through. And Professor Uwaleke says in the unlikely event that happens, and the question will be, what are those situations that might lead to a state having less? For instance, some people have made the argument that for instance, the question of tomatoes, for instance, are produced in large quantities in one part of the country, and then because there are no tomato puree industries in that part, as little value addition is shipped down to other parts of the country, particularly the southwest, where these industries abound, and they're now turned into tomato puree and packaged, and consumption takes place there, and they're also shipped back. They argue that under this arrangement, that what currently subsists, they can get some reasonable amount from VAT on those goods. But in the event this goes through, what would happen is that those southwest areas where the factories are would now get much more, and where the tomatoes are produced would get far less. Is that
no, that is
argument?
No, it's not valid. Those arguments are not valid. Again, it's also because of the misunderstanding of. In fact, what we have realized is that even the current system, most people don't even understand how it works currently. So moving from where we are now to what we are proposing, it requires a lot of understanding of the current system first and foremost, and then what is being proposed. So let me answer the first part of the question about what are the likely scenarios that will make a state get less revenue. If we assume that revenue from VAT will remain constant, so in other words, it will not increase, and then we change the formula for distributing it, and there's no extra amount coming from the federal government, then it will be a zero-sum game, because whatever one state gains is what one or two other states are losing. But to address that problem, there's number one, the generosity of the federal government to say, I give you 5% of what I used to collect, which is 1/3, by the way. It's huge. Then the second one is that as part of these reforms, we identified that the non-compliance ratio of VAT is around 70%. In other words, we are collecting about 30% of what we could be collecting today. So we have provisions in those bills before the National Assembly on electronic invoicing, fiscalization, that will give us intelligence to ensure that people pay the right amount. So this is another one. And then there's growth, because these reforms are holistic, and they're trying to help the economy grow. And once the economy grows, consumption will go up. So you now see we have three backups, or I would say safety nets. The money coming from the federal government as a gift to the states. Number two is closing the compliance gap so that everybody pays. Even we did a lot of experiment, or should I call it, by just trying to buy things in Lagos and Abuja, the most developed cities in Nigeria. And people were selling things worth tens of millions of naira without charging VAT. So we know that that problem is there. And then the third one is the growth. So that's why Prof said in the unlikely event, because for this to really happen, it will be that everything has gone wrong with the economy, which we do not envisage. So that is the first part of the question. So the second part is this issue of tomatoes,
yes,
and it could be yam, it could be any other thing. So first, what we are proposing is consumption-based, not production-based. In other words, you are recognized for the VAT that is consumed in your state, not the one that is produced. So if we produce tomatoes and we send it to Lagos or Abeokuta, and they produce tomato paste, and they sell it to people who buy so they can consume, that is when the VAT will be attributed to them. So it's almost like, for example, informal sector may not necessarily charge VAT because many of them don't use invoices, they don't use bank accounts, they collect cash in Kano market to markets in Anambra and Aba. But you know what? Informal sectors consume VAT. So that man and that woman who has no bank account, who does not use an invoice, who collects everything in cash, who buy airtime, that man will have a mobile phone. That woman will have a vehicle. That woman, when they make a lot of money, they build a house. When they make some more money, they go for Hajj or they go to Jerusalem. They buy wines, they buy drinks. So when you are consuming, you are paying VAT. So what we actually did was to analyze the biggest contributor to VAT in terms of goods and services. And number one by a mile is telecommunication. The number of subscribers in Kano, for example, I think is only next to Lagos. The next one is cement. Cement is consumed everywhere in Nigeria. Sugar, you'll be surprised, they consume more sugar in the north than in the south. Sugar is a big contributor to VAT.
But already sugar has been taxed, isn't it?
Yes, sugar is being taxed today. There's VAT. So what I'm trying to say is that even though a state may not be well industrialized, they may have a lot of informal sector players. It does not stop them from consuming VAT. When they consume products and services that have VAT, that will be attributed to that state and they will be properly rewarded. So this does not put anyone at a disadvantage.
All right. In addition to the discussion, we also have a number of reports. Let's get to see this one by Abubakar Akwanga.
In a statement, the Minister of Information and National Orientation, Mohammed Idris, says the robust nationwide debate on the new tax reform bills currently before the National Assembly is welcomed and commendable. It is very inspiring to see Nigerians from all walks of life coming out to express their views and opinions on these matters of critical national importance. This is the very essence and meaning of democracy. The minister calls on all commentators and groups to keep up the spirit of informed engagement and to strive to be respectful and understanding at all times, despite the diversity of opinions, and in the spirit of democratic engagement. There should be no room for name-calling or for the injection of unnecessary ethnic and regional slurs into this important national conversation. Similarly, it is important to be aware that there is a lot of misinformation and fake news circulating around the tax bills and the overall reform agenda of the Tinubu administration. The fiscal reforms will not impoverish any state or region of the country, neither will they lead to the scrapping or weakening of any federal agencies. The statement says instead they will bring relief to tens of millions of hardworking Nigerians across the country and empower and position our states and the 774 local governments for sustainable growth and development. The minister says President Bola Ahmed Tinubu is implementing an ambitious fiscal reform agenda that will dissolve more resources to Nigerians' state and local governments and ultimately to the Nigerian people. It is pertinent to state that government has nothing sinister to warrant the suggestion that the process is being rushed in line with the established legislative procedure. The federal government welcomes meaningful input that can address whatever gray areas there may be in the bill. In this vein, President Tinubu has already directed the Federal Ministry of Justice and relevant officials to work on the draft and work closely with the National Assembly to ensure that all genuine concerns have been addressed before the bills are passed. We are indeed witnessing at this moment in the history of Nigeria the most far-reaching, impactful, and beneficial set of fiscal reforms that Nigeria has seen in decades. In addition to the 4 tax bills being debated and deliberated upon, there is also the 2023 Supreme Court ruling on financial autonomy for local governments, which will significantly empower the tier of government that is closest to the Nigerian people. In all, these reforms will not only facilitate increased revenue without imposing additional tax burdens on the people, they will also make it possible for citizens to demand enjoying greater accountability in the management of public resources at all levels of government. President Tinubu and the administration will continue to champion policies that will close loopholes and gaps through which Nigeria's valuable public resources have been frittered away for decades. On top of this necessary foundation, the resources being conserved and realized from these reforms will be invested in critical infrastructure, healthcare, education, transportation, digital economy, and so on, and in the social investment that will benefit all Nigerians and ensure that no one is left behind. This is the promise and the reality of the renewed hope agenda of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. In Abuja, Abubakar Akwanga, NTA News.
Next, to take this report from Lagos.
Lagos State, apart from being the 5th largest economy in Africa, financial experts have over the years rated the state as one of the few generating huge revenue from tax. Experts say this feat is aided by an advanced system of taxation and a large population of prospective taxpayers. With its status as the commercial nerve center of the country, buttressed by the presence of more private sector companies, financial experts believe Lagos has been a major economic lifeline of the country.
Whatever you see in that corporate income tax bucket for the federal government, a chunk of it came from Lagos State, undoubtedly. Activities, commercial activities are going on in Lagos, maybe up to 50% of the industries across the country are cited here. Trade is also heavy in Lagos. The capacity to consume is huge. The population is huge. The effective demand is huge. So Lagos is definitely a significant contributor to tax income in the country.
Most of the companies that are cited in Lagos, most of them fall under the category of regulated company, especially those in the financial services sector. Most of them have their headquarters in Lagos, and also other companies that are regulated, like the insurance company, the fund managers, the investment bank, the stockbroking firms, the asset management firms, and all these companies are well regulated, and by the virtue of regulation, a lot of them have a compliance unit in their, in their system that tracks tax collection and remittance to the federal post, and that has actually assisted a lot.
The port, which is one of the busiest in Africa, has made it an investment destination.
The number speaks for itself. The IGR of Lagos over the years, we've seen how it has grown in leaps and bounds from about 14 billion in 1999 to 2023, when we have about around 16 billion naira. 2024 is definitely bigger. As we're rounding up, we will know how much Lagos State eventually close with in terms of internally generated revenue for 2024. So as per whether it is effective or not, the numbers says it is effective.
Make tax payments easier and more accessible through technology. People should be able to pay their taxes in the comfort of their home on their phone. And what we need to do is to develop more, applications, more software that will aid ease of, tax collection and remittance into the federal purse.
Experts, however, believe that the state can still attain its peak with a tax system that provides opportunity to generate more revenue. In Lagos, Joel Bukbola.
And then let's get this one from Kanu.
Kano, as an economically viable state, has a lot of economic activities going on, with markets driving the process. The state has all layers of markets, from the international, national to local and rural markets.
Our members are trying to pay daily. We have many types of generation revenue. We used to contribute a yearly generated revenue, monthly, and also a daily, day-to-day activities generated revenue.
This is what put the state in a right position to have a sound revenue base, which relies on how best the tax administration functions. Not long ago, the State Assembly has reviewed the laws governing the revenue, which provided for a harmonized tax collections across all layers and forms of taxes for a more realistic and transparent generation and to address multiple taxation.
With the activities that I told you we've been doing in the last 6 months, we begin to see traction and spike in the entire revenue collection. The currently is doing 5 billion. In the past, hardly generates 2 to 3 billion in the past, but now comfortably so we're doing. But that is not really the ultimate target. Our target is to be able to generate more than 10 billion naira per month for the time being.
Although taxpayers are also doing their best to ensure remittance of all that is due to be paid, stakeholders are suggesting for a more creative collection system.
Even a market woman should register her business. In this way, then you will be able to collect proper tax.
But currently what we are doing is to identify each trader, each marketer, each petty trader within the market and major traders within the market, using their national identity number and link it to the local tax identity number that we have. In that way, we feel we'll be able to assess better what is the contribution of each of the markets.
Stakeholders are of the view that responsive governance that prioritizes welfare of citizens is a sure way to encouraging taxpayers to pay more. In Kano, Aminu Umar.
Well, at this point, we'll take a short break. When we return, there'll be more on the 4 bills which propose to reform Nigeria's tax administration and collection of revenue. Stay with us. We'll be back.
From the Atlantic across the savannah to the Sahara, we rise, a land of the free, we know they tire. We dream great, our spirit is undying.
Resilient, rooted like palm tree, we sway in colors, with undying demand. We bet solutions, we ignite passion, yeah. Ethnicity is unique, we have more than destination.
We are Nigeria, we are Nigeria, strengthening unity, we know they carry lives. We are Nigeria, together live the dream of a land with great destiny. We are Nigeria.
I am the real Nigerian. Brought to you by the National Orientation Agency, NOA.
The federal government of Nigeria warns vandals of national assets, electricity transmission towers, cables, and other facilities to desist from this act of sabotage. Vandalism is a serious crime punishable under the law. Vandalizing electrical equipment will affect millions of Nigerians, including your loved ones. Remember that national assets belong to all of us, hence the need to protect them. Report all cases of suspicious movement around electrical facilities to security agencies. When you see something, say something. This message is from the Federal Ministry of Information and National Orientation in collaboration with the National Counter-Terrorism Center, NCTC, Office of the National Security Advisor.
NTA Tuesday Live, a network issue-oriented innovation talk show.
Thanks for staying with us. It's all about reforming the tax system for economic development. And this segment is where we open the phone lines, and it means you can join in the conversation in the studio. The numbers to call will be on your screens. You can call those numbers. We advise that if you call it in and you get through, do us a favor, turn down the volume of your TV set. That's the way to avoid the hurlback of the echo. We also encourage you to go straight to the point and not bother too much about greetings. Just a simple hello would do. So we start off now with another in our reports, and this one is from Oka.
The tax reform initiated by the current administration are multifaceted and aim to achieve several key objectives, some of which include coordinate efforts between the different tiers of government, resulting in better tax resource management and clarity for taxpayers. The reform package includes the Nigerian Tax Bill, the Nigerian Tax Administration Bill, the Nigerian Revenue Service Establishment Bill, and the Joint Revenue Board Establishment Bill, with each addressing specific aspects of tax administration, compliance, and enforcement. In light of the ongoing, the Anambra State government has committed to a thorough review of the proposed changes, as the reforms have significant implications for the state, which is known for its vibrant economy and entrepreneur spirit.
We have not even digested it. There are still a lot of discussions about that. We will fix a date that even the Anambra Internal Revenue will call for stakeholders to give them the insight about this thing generally.
To some citizens in the state, the tax reform represents a significant step towards addressing the structural challenges facing the Nigerian economy.
One key area in the new tax reform is that it is based on derivative principles. The tax being generated in your area. So that is one thing. So when the new tax reform is put in place, it will make other states that are generating less tax to go and make efforts to begin to generate more taxes.
The exercise is in the interest of the growth of the economy of this country. It is in the interest of the improvement of the welfare of this country. It is going to stimulate various components of this country to now begin to produce.
It will go a long way in shaping the landscape of Nigeria. Nigerians will be the beneficiaries at the end of it all. Reason being that it will give room for independent states to consider the people and allowing people to do their thing, generate their revenue, then remit what is for the state to the state coffers, and that what is for the federal government to federal government coffers. It will even make the states to be more productive.
In all, they agree that the reform presents an opportunity to enhance economic growth and improve the overall quality of life for citizens. In Oka, Joy Iluebu.
All right, here. We still have with us Mr. Taiwo Edele, who's chairman of the Presidential Committee on Fiscal Policy and Tax Reforms, as well as Professor Uche Uwaleke, Director, Institute of Capital Market Studies, Nasarawa State University, who's joining us via Zoom from Cairo in Egypt. Prof, taking a cue from some of the reports, particularly the last one, which we've just listened to, and Oh dear, we do believe that these signals will come back. Yes, do we still have Professor Waleke on? Right. Okay, we'll try and re-establish those links and get back to him. But back to you here in the studio. Still on the matter of consumption and determining the rate of consumption. As you were explaining, one of the things I wanted to ask here was, you have also admitted that there is a huge percentage of buying and selling which goes without any collection of VAT, because most of the informal sector, all right, most of the informal sector has no way of electronic invoicing, for instance, where you could now introduce VAT. So some of those who have challenged and criticized this bill have said a lot of consumption would go on in the marketplaces and village squares. How do you determine the volume of that consumption? Because you'd be relying entirely on the shops where you could get your data from. But a lot of what goes on would be in village markets or marketplaces where you don't have a system in place to ascertain the level of consumption. How do you intend to navigate around that?
Yes, this is actually one of the areas where we see, rather than a problem, we see significant opportunities. So today, the VAT revenue that we have in Nigeria and we distribute across has not been able to capture this informal sector, whether it's in Lagos, whether it's in Kebbi, whether it's in Zamfara or Borno. It's not captured, right? But it's because as a country, we've not been paying attention to it. Why do I say that? So think about POS today. Go to rural areas and you find POS machines there. In Kenya, they have M-Pesa. And every time I go to Kenya, I'm fascinated by the fact that people who are not read, they've not been to school, they can't read, they can't write. All that they need to do is to be able to press one or two buttons on their phone that don't have to be smartphones. And that's how they pay for transportation. That's how they do everything. In Nigeria, we have those facilities. We're not using them. So imagine that we get to a point where every state is now paying attention, and you go to the village market, and you ask them to use their mobile phone, and you ask them to do, like POS machine, and they get an incentive for doing that. First, you help them to be able to scale their businesses. Number two, you benefit from getting some of the recognition for the taxes being generated. So if you don't make these efforts, we will not make progress. And therefore, we see it as an opportunity rather than a problem.
Okay. Well, Prof. Waleke, if you back with us. Oh, there.
Okay, you're not back. Because, for example, let me give you one practical example. You have people selling tomatoes, you have people selling yams. Today, we just let them struggle and do whatever they can. You know what the state can do? I can encourage them to come together. You get aggregators. So those aggregators will collect those tomatoes or the yams, aggregate them. So first thing, the farmers get better pay for their produce because now they are cutting out the middlemen. Then the aggregator invoices, because now it's a big business. You can then invoice for a whole truck of yam in tens of millions of naira. And that's captured there. And when government wants to help, so this is not just about taxes alone. You're thinking about a tractor for farmers. You're thinking about fertilizer. Instead of giving it to individual farmers that you cannot monitor, you give it to their cooperative or association. So it becomes even a platform for helping them. For providing, you can decide you want to do empowerment to train them on how to do their seedlings, how to do their cultivation, how to do whatever it is that they need to do. Before you know it, you see productivity goes up significantly in the country and everybody benefits. So this is not just about tax. I think it's more like the trigger for us to start doing things differently in a way that will move our country forward and make prosperity common for our people.
All right, thank you. We understand that Professor Waleke is back now. Prof, yes, there you are. We were just going to come to you on the matter of determining the data with regards to consumption, where a lot of it takes place in the informal sector, in our towns, cities, and even villages, where you have no means of electronic invoicing. So what are your thoughts on that?
Address that, give you a practical example, but I also think it also calls for the need to, for us to also begin to see how we can formalize the informal sector. The informal sector is huge in this country, and the more many of them get formalized, the better it is, for the economy. And part of how to do that is to also ensure that these micro businesses that fall within that informal sector are exempt from paying taxes. Okay, are exempt, do not face the challenge of multiple taxes, multiple levies, especially the ones imposed by non-state actors, which is also what the tax reforms seek to address. By the time you remove multiplicity of taxes, by the time you remove all these levies that the people in the informal sector suffer, you allow them to grow. Okay, by the time they grow, they of course they get formalized in the process, and then government can come and get some revenues from them. Okay, look at the capital market, for example, the stock market, for example. Today in Nigeria, we have about 155 companies that are listed on the exchange. And this is an economy where you have millions of companies that are registered, a number of them, in the formal sector. So we want to see a situation in which many of these companies in the formal sector, can grow, and also begin to also see how they can, come to the exchange. So the point I'm making is this, that the reforms are trying to provide an environment in which the informal sector can also grow. I am currently in, Cairo on a study tour, and tomorrow I will be visiting the Ministry of Finance here in Egypt. Okay, part of what they're doing here is to also shift from, if you like, production to consumption in terms of taxes. And I've just give you an example that in Egypt, companies' income tax is as low as 22.5%, whereas the VAT is as high as 14%. So what it means is you have a situation in which businesses here, okay, don't pay taxes as much as they do in Nigeria. So on comparative grounds, you could say that the people in Nigeria, the business firms in Nigeria are paying higher taxes. Large firms, of course, that pay 30%. Effectively, by the time you include all the taxes they pay, the education tax and so on, effectively over 32%. All right. I'm also aware that there are categories of businesses that pay, lower, 20%. But we have businesses that are paying something high, and the equivalent of these businesses in other, countries, are paying less. So the point I'm making is, yes, the VAT issue is there, but it is just one aspect of the whole lot, gamut we have in the tax reforms. Okay, so that we don't subsume these positives, under the VAT. So anytime this issue of tax reforms are being discussed, the whole attention shouldn't just be on VAT, because there are a whole lot that you have there. Okay, I've just talked about the issue of streamlining, multiple taxes. That is one. There's also the issue of redistributing income. Part of what the tax reform seeks to do is to redistribute income in Nigeria. That's why you find that those earning less than 800,000, for example, are now exempt. So the burden of tax ideally should be on the rich, which is the philosophy also behind the tax reforms, exempting those people, that are vulnerable, that are poor. Now, the other thing to also note in these tax reforms is that the food, education, and health, okay, their products and services in relation to food, education, and health are now enjoying a zero exempt status. Okay, unlike the current situation where you have them as exempt, there's a difference between zero rating and exempt. Okay, what that means is that those involved in these activities can now recover their input VAT, as opposed to the current situation where they're exempted and they don't get input VAT. So I'm saying that the reforms, the totality of the reforms is what Nigerians should focus on, and not just on one bit of it, the derivation aspect, so we don't end up, if you like, at the end of the day, you end up you throwing away the baby, and the bathwater. But even the derivation thing, okay, just as the chairman has explained now, will even be in the favor of the states and all stakeholders at the end of the day.
So on this other one as well, and I've heard people suggest certain opinions, and that deals with having a group of people exempt from paying tax, those earning below a certain level. I've heard one person say, well, that may sound so good, but in the long run, with the proposed increase in VAT and bringing in more sources of taxation, which of course you've always argued against, that it would amount to giving with the left and taking away with the right. Well, just before you answer that, let's get this call from Samuel, who's calling in from Benue. Samuel, go ahead.
Hello.
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, good evening.
Good evening.
My question is about the civil servants. You say those earning below 1 million naira are not supposed to pay tax. I would like the speaker to speak more on this.
Okay.
So that I get clarification. Thank you very much.
Right, thank you. It was just what we're going to talk about.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, so if you want to put it that way about giving with one hand
And
the
taking
right
with the other.
and taking with
Because
the
they
other
say,
one.
yes, they would pay tax, but they're going to now pay more VAT.
So let's say that we even agree with that for a moment. Right. Then it will be that we are giving with the right hand to the poor, and we are taking from the rich with the left hand. Because that's why I've explained that these people that we're exempting from paying income tax that earn about 1 million a year, that's about 83,000 naira per month. They're not the one buying brand new cars. They're not the one buying wine from France and champagne from stuff that one bottle will be 150,000 naira. They're not the one that go to 5-star hotels to go and have a bar and continental food. They're not the ones who fly first class. So what we are saying is, and one thing I still don't fully understand is, you have 5 items. We are removing VAT from 4. People are not talking about, I thought the question would be, people will say, why are you taking VAT from almost everything? Where are we going to find the revenue? People are focusing on the one, and they're saying, why are you raising the VAT?
No, because they'd
Whereas
rather you even remove the VAT completely.
Yeah, but because this one that we are having VAT on is what is mostly consumed by the rich people. In every country, you have to create a system that is progressive. That's why Professor said these reforms are also trying to redistribute income, because some people have more income than they can ever. In fact, there are people who don't spend 1% of their income in a year on food because they have so much money. And there are people who can't survive before the end of the month. They are borrowing to feed themselves. That society is a society where you have inequality. Nigeria is one country where the Gini coefficient shows that there's a lot of inequality. So what we are doing is to intentionally design the tax system to give more money to those poor people, and that should come partly from the rich people in society, and that's how we can have a society where there is more justice and fairness.
Okay, we have another caller from Yobe. Caleb from Yobe, right? Hello.
Good evening, sir.
Yes, good evening.
Hello, I can hear you.
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, I just want to ask, in the society we have people that venture into mobility service, or in another word we can say mobility providers. So these people now, they also pay certain tax, ranging from identity plate, licenses, permit, etc. And they pay this tax to various group establishments like the union, tax board, state, etc. So now, I actually want to know, how does this reform affect these certain people, or how does the reform define them? So that is my question, sir.
All right.
Okay. Yeah, good question, and I think it's relevant to what we have been discussing. For example, VAT is applicable if you take a private car, you take an Uber, for example, you pay VAT. But if you get on a bus with other people, we call it shared passenger transportation, there's no VAT. Again, because the poorest people don't hire private cars to move them around. So while there's VAT, that VAT is targeted at the people who have a little bit more to give. Then to his point about you pay motor park, you pay unions, some people stop you on the road, you pay licenses. Some of it you continue to pay, like your driver license, your vehicle license. That's done everywhere in the world. You have to renew them, and you need to pay the fees. Although our reform also targets making sure that whoever is determining how much you pay as those fees, they are not being arbitrary. So you can't just wake up and say my license fee is 200,000 naira for no reason. So we have a framework to try and control how that is done. The second one is that for the informal taxes that are paid to non-state actors, if unions stop you and they say you must pay, because what they're doing is they're collecting membership fee, but they're forcing you to be their members. There's not a lot we can do about that. The proposals we have in our reforms is to stop cash collection and to stop physical enforcement of tax collection. So don't go on the road with some stick and nails all over the place. If you can implement that, it will bring sanity.
Well, but sometimes even state actors engage in that. You see all over FCT,
yeah,
for
even
instance.
FCT, yes.
In FCT, you see strange fellows with...
Yeah, they just, some of them, in fact, it has happened to me before.
Okay, we'll come to that aspect. We have Umokocha from Abakaliki on the line. Hello.
Hello, good evening.
Yes, go ahead, please.
My name is Barnabas Mukocha from Abakaliki.
Go on.
Good evening, Cyril. Good evening, research manager there.
Evening.
Where I'm concerned is, we talked about the consumer and the producer. Now, the VAT heavily goes to the consumers and not the producers. So, how do they encourage those producing efficiently to reach them, so that the third party or second party will not hijack what's supposed to be for them, so that they could be effective in producing more? Because if you starve a fowl that laid the golden egg, it might die in 1 second.
Okay. I think he's done with the question.
All right.
So Where I is how we go carry them along.
Okay.
Okay. So that's a good question. So the interesting thing about value-added tax is that it's in stages. So let's use bread as an example because everybody can relate with that. So to produce bread, in fact, we can even use sandwich or burger. So let's say the focus here is on sandwich. So the person that is selling sandwich, assuming there is VAT, will charge VAT where those sandwiches are being consumed, and that VAT is attributed to that state. But to produce sandwich, the sandwich maker bought bread. The person that is producing bread, maybe is in another state, he sold the bread. That VAT on the bread will be attributed to the state where the bread was produced and sold. The person who produced bread bought flour, bought oil, bought sugar. All of those activities, that's why it's called value-added tax. It has stages. Any product that you see, chances are that it's gone through several stages. Those stages, it will cut across states. Every state picks its own value at that point, and then it goes to the other state, and it continues the value from the point where it stopped previously. So it's actually by design. It's a very fair system that recognizes the effort of every participant at every stage of the production process. So it's not a problem. And we don't need any, because I've heard people ask this question about, do we have the technology to capture it? You don't need any technology to capture it. The way it's done today is that by law, every taxpayer that is running a business, whether it's formal, whether it's informal, whether it's big or small, unless it's exempted, is required to file returns. It's when you are filing your returns, you are not in doubt where you made your money from. And so it's you that will go to the system and fill out, my sales is 2 million naira. VAT on it is 10,000. And I sold half of that in Kano. I sold the other one in Suleja, the other one in Abuja. You will be able to tell. And that's why we're exempting very small businesses who can't keep records. Okay. So it's nothing to worry about. We can do it, and we have the system to do it even today.
Right, so back to the phones. We have Funsho calling in from Mina. Hello, Funsho.
Hello, hello.
Yes, Funsho, go ahead.
Hello, good evening.
Yes, good evening. Go on.
Yeah, my question is the issue of why is it that a lot of people in the north are against this? Some people in the north are against this bill. But I want to, is it the understanding or the sharing formula, or is it the percentage? Because this bill is meant to grow our economy. This bill is meant to improve our GDP, and it creates rooms for development and investors to come to Nigeria to invest. I see no reason why a lot of people are going against this bill. I know they have their opinions to talk, but this thing, I think, I just listened to the chairman now, trying to explain on how the VTA will go, as in where the goods is produced, where the goods is consumed. I think this alone is enough for everybody to get understanding of this bill, because I said no, this bill is a bill that going to improve our GDP, and I see no reason why people are afraid of being supported. I've been afraid to support this bill, because this bill is a good bill. Please, let's not throw away the baby with the bathwater. Please. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Funsho.
Yeah, thank you, Funsho. I think it's a valid point, but on the other hand as well, we welcome the debate. To be honest, I think because of the issue that was raised around this VAT distribution, we have the attention of the whole country now. We may not have received this level of focus by even the ordinary Nigerian all the way to our political leaders. The fact that we are paying attention to this reform is actually very good for the country. I know that at the end of the day, we would have consultation. We will find a way to resolve our issues and we get the bills passed. But this whole process we're going through now of educating ourselves, explaining to ourselves, is very, very healthy for the system. And therefore, we welcome those discussions.
Let's go over to Professor Waleke. Well, Prof, you hear the word timing, and a lot of people say perhaps the timing is wrong. You hear this almost all the time when things are brought up and say, when is the appropriate time? That's on one level. And the other is for those who have raised concerns that it seems there is a rush to pass these bills, and that leads to a suspicion about what the intent would be. Why do you think this feeling persists?
Well, let me even start with the issue of rush, whether the rush allegation of rush to pass the bill. You recall the issue we had with the petroleum industry bill that lingered for so long on them, and then the impact that that whole delay had on the economy. And now regarding this one, I don't subscribe to the idea that it's being rushed. Recall that the Committee on Fiscal Policy and Tax Reforms was set up over a year ago. And that committee tried to be as inclusive as possible. I just told you that I'm a member of that committee. I'm not a government official. I don't work for the government, I'm one of the independent, members, one of those representing the academia. And you also have a number of independent people there, people from the representatives from professional bodies, ICANN, ANAN. You have the Manufacturer Association of Nigeria, small businesses, all very inclusive, membership. And the committee has taken time to do the work for over a year now. So one wouldn't say that whatever outcome that is coming out from there, has been rushed. Okay, so I don't think it's about rushing, because if you delay this kind of reforms, the more you delay them, okay, the more you the problem persists. So that is that. On the issue of timing, I don't think it could have even been better, than this time. If you look at the numerous problems or numerous challenges, facing the economy today, and particularly on the even on the fiscal side. Okay, remember that it's not just about tax; it's about fiscal policy, which of course tax is only a part of fiscal policy. The committee was also saddled with the issue of public spending. Addressing the issue of public spending, how public spending should be done optimally, and then of course the issue of public debt. Now the tax aspect is only one aspect of it. All right. Today, the story about where the GDP growth is. The story about where the inflation rate is, and part of where we have, as I argued this earlier, we have high inflation in this country today, and weak GDP growth. Part of why we have stagflation in Nigeria today also has to do with the inefficient tax system. Okay, today collection, government is not collecting as much as it should. Okay, not because the rates, okay, are low, or it's nothing to do with the rates, but more to do with the collection efficiency. Part of what the reforms seek to do is to improve collection efficiency. Part of what the reforms seek to do is to widen the tax net, not to increase the tax rate. Okay, that's not the objective. It's just to widen the tax net to ensure that people who are supposed to pay tax are paying tax, particularly as earlier mentioned, the rich. Unfortunately, in Nigeria today, you have so many wealthy people that are not paying what they ought to pay. So the reforms are meant to ensure that people pay a fair share of whatever they get, to the government. So we have widening government deficit today, and you find the government always resorting to borrowing when there are opportunities to grow IGR, not only at the level of the federal government, but also at the level of subnationals. So the more the government is able to grow its IGR, the more the government is able to narrow the fiscal imbalance, the more the government borrows less. And of course, whatever is being generated is also part of the recommendations of the committee. And I talked about spending too. Is also channeled, is also spent in a very productive manner. So I think this is the time to do that because of the challenges we face. I think if the reforms go through, and I want to believe that they will go through, all right, government will have more money through improved collection efficiency, through expanding the tax net, and the small businesses will also grow. And as they grow, okay, you also find that government revenue will improve because more people are being productive, and more money is being made by the citizens.
Ahmed is calling in from Lagos. Hello. Hello, Mohammed from Lagos. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Right.
Yeah. Good evening.
Evening.
Yeah. I want to assume that the overall intention of this reform is to encourage production, and by encouraging production, you are invariably increasing the tax net. Am I correct? Thank you.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, seems like a comment. Yes, we are trying to promote economic activities, including production, including consumption, and therefore also recognize where these economic activities take place so that those states are rewarded more, and therefore we can have a competition that is healthy across Nigeria, where every state is trying to outperform the other by promoting economic activities. There are states in Nigeria today that if you go and put up a banner to start a business, within a few days, they will pounce on you from different agencies to come and collect all manners of levies, not even allowing you to start the business. If we all recognize that at the end of the day, the only sustainable way to generate revenue is by promoting economic activities, then it's a whole shift in mindset as to how we govern ourselves as a people. All the countries that we want to be like, that people like to relocate and go to, this is how they run their countries, allow businesses to grow. America would even almost reward you when you make losses in a new business. You can sell it and get the money back. And that's why many companies start in the US and they don't succeed, but the few ones that succeed, maybe ratio of 3 to 10, are the reason why they're the largest economy in the world. So we need to promote economic activities in Nigeria.
All right, let's quickly go back to Professor Owaleke. Yes, you've just said you're a member of the committee representing the academia. And perhaps let's start with you before we come back to the chairman on this aspect. Which aspect of these bills, oh dear, it's gone off again. All right, you're back there. Which aspect of these bills, or is there any aspect of these bills, that suggests, oh dear, we'll take this call, Isiaku from Kebbi, and then we'll take this call and return to you, Prof. Isiaku from Kebbi.
Hello?
Go ahead.
I can hear you. I can hear you.
Yes, go ahead, please. Yes, go on, Isiaku.
All right. Please, I want to ask a question to the guest you have there. Please educate me on the need of on the productivity. How can tax the net that you people are asking are saying that the expansion of the tax net will increase productivity? I need please a thorough explanation on that. Then the second question is, how does tax improving our economy? I'm not a student of economics, but I want to believe productivity is part of, is what brings about the economic development in any society. Then I want to put a question to Professor on the issue he said about the petroleum bill that has been lingering for a very long time. Give me a simple reason on what has that bill, what is the achievement of that bill? Does the petroleum issue in this country being resolved? We are still buying exorbitant prices on petroleum, 1,000 plus per liter, all these things. What are the gains of that bill that the professor has already mentioned that the petroleum bill has come to pass? And please, I need some little explanation. Then lastly, is the issue of this explanation I needed from the chairman, please, sir. I need a simple explanation. If probably a headquarter is in state A and probably I'm residing in state B, I have been told that if I use any product from that, from the headquarter of state A, my VAT, the VAT will be deducted from me and probably goes to state A. I need some little, please, explanation on that. Thank you.
All right. Professor Waleke would take the aspect of the 4 questions, I believe, that you asked, which emanated, the part of the questions that emanated from his comments. That's the Petroleum Act.
Start with the one on the correlation between taxes and productivity that he started with. Okay, so when I said that it's all meant to enhance productivity, first, of course, enhance ease of doing business. You know that with improvement in ease of doing business, you're likely to attract investors. You're likely to attract investment. But more importantly, when I made that point, I had in mind the fact that small businesses, are no longer going to pay taxes under the new arrangement. So if your turnover is less than 50 million, for example, you get exemptions. If the issue of abolishing the multiplicity of taxes and levies, will also help businesses. So if you're a small business, for example, and you are not paying tax, okay, that will enable you to reinvest whatever profit you have made, and that can also enable you grow. It is only when you have grown to a level where you now start making turnover above 50 million that the tax authority can now say, okay, let's get them. So the exemptions, the waivers, if you like, are all meant to promote productivity. Now, on the issue of the bill, the Petroleum Industry Act, that lingered, you asked the question, what has even been the gain? Well, one thing it has done, or one thing it is meant to do, because there are two different things. It's one thing to, of course, have a law in place, and then another thing is whether the law is being implemented, as you originally intended. The whole idea behind the Petroleum Industry Act is to open up that space, is to allow, again, investors, to come in. Okay, the expectation is that with the Petroleum Industry Act, by now, we're expecting to see, for example, a lot more investments, not only in the upstream, but also in the downstream. So people had expected that by now we would have seen a lot more modular refineries, for example, in place. Now, the Petroleum Industry Act also helped even the setting up of Dangote refinery that we have today. So it's a good thing that we'll have it. Of course, there are also many other provisions in that act, including the host communities fund that is meant to reduce the sickness we have in that region. So I am saying that we don't need to delay this tax reform bill. We don't need to prolong it the way we had that of the petroleum industry bill. The earlier that it is passed, I think the better for the economy.
You before the call came through, and I'm thinking you should be really interested in this aspect of the bills being from the academia. Which aspect of it, or is there an aspect of these bills that suggests the scrapping of agencies like TED Fund?
Not to my knowledge, I don't think. I think there is an aspect that says that I think 2% or so, will now go to student loan fund. So student loan fund is going to get more money. I don't think there's any aspect there that's specifically puts TED Fund in danger. Maybe the chairman can.
Okay, we will do that. So yeah. At this point, we'd like to thank you, Professor Uche Uwaleke, for coming on. Thank you very much. You joined us via Zoom from Cairo. Thank you for being part of this. Always a pleasure to have you join our conversation.
My pleasure, Cedric. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Right. So, well, there are about 3 or 4 issues which you would have to address. The one from the last caller, Ishaku. And of course, this aspect.
And the TED Fund.
Yes, TED Fund. I'm bringing this because it's been said that in harmonizing all the different taxes and making sure you do not have multiplicity of taxes, what you're doing is you're going to take away the taxes that provide the funding for agencies like TED Fund. And of course, because of a students' loan scheme has been put in place, it means money will be given to the students who might not be able to pay back, and an agency like TED Fund, without being funded, would gradually be scrapped. Right. So is there any aspect of these bills or any portion of it that suggests this?
The answer is no. There is no aspect of the bill that suggests scrapping of an agency. So, for example, the TED Fund has a law that established the TED Fund. That law has a section that says there shall be a tax to be paid, tertiary education tax, collected by the FRS and given to that fund. So these bills, tax bills, are saying that stop collecting that tax. Between when these laws are passed, hopefully it takes effect from 2025, between 2025 and 2030, TED Fund will share money from a new consolidated levy that we call development levy. So companies will pay just that one tax instead of so many. And that amount is shared to some agencies, including TED Fund. So they'll collect that amount and give it to universities. Let's not forget that TED Fund in itself is a vehicle for funding education. So what will happen from 2030 is that that development levy goes entirely to student loans fund. Student will then take the loan and give it to the school. So the money is still going to the universities, but now through the student. If a student takes that loan because they're poor, they don't have to pay back until they find a job, and there's no interest. So the risk to the student is zero risk. Because the children of poor people can get the loan to go to universities, it means that universities can charge a little bit more, which the poor person does not have to pay directly because they get the loan, and the people who are not so poor, after they're going to private university today, will then pay to go to school. If the standard of education goes up, we attract foreign students that will pay a premium. There used to be a time in Nigeria that foreign students came to Nigeria. I lecture myself at universities, about 2 of them, and thinking that university professors get 400,000 naira a month, it breaks my heart. That's not the amount they deserve. We need this system to work. There's a ranking of the top 25 universities in Africa. The top 10, there's no Nigerian university there. South African university dominates the top 10. They don't have education tax. So governments should then fund those agencies through budgetary allocation. They should also become creative. Why don't we have endowments in billions of dollars in Nigeria? That's a university, one university in the US will have billions coming from endowments. So why don't we focus on intellectual property, help university develop? Why are the lecturers not doing research that they can commercialize? So there's so many ways of funding, even apart from budgetary funding. So we're not recommending scrapping of any agency. We're just saying let's not overburden the businesses that we have with too many taxes. When they pay companies income tax, they pay value-added tax, personal income tax, stamp duties. Government should collect that money and allocate based on their priorities per time. So let me quickly address the last caller's question. There was a question on production. Production means I have a worker and they can produce 10 glasses a day. That's production they have produced. If I do anything and tomorrow they can produce 12, then that's productivity because they are producing more than they used to produce before. How does tax come in? Tax come in because to set up the factory to produce these glasses, there's so much cost that is added to it today. And that's why Mr. President said, let's stop taxing investment and capital. We're taking that away. So you have more money to set up the facilities to produce these glasses. That's production. As part of the bills, we also have a provision there that allows businesses to put more money into research and development. There's so much restriction in the law today. The more of that you do, the more you find ways of producing this faster and cheaper, and that's productivity. You can now pay the workers more. You can grow the business. The economy can grow, and there's prosperity that is shared amongst our people. The last part of his question is, how do you attribute all of these between where it's produced and where it's consumed? And I think I addressed it before. The VAT system goes through a process of value creation in stages. So whoever produces the first thing might be raw material. As they invoice or sell it, the VAT is captured and given to that state. Another person processes it to intermediate product. VAT is captured, differential between the two. Another person did the final production. In fact, the person that collected to go and deliver, the person that stores it. Because at every stage, somebody is doing something and adding value to it. That VAT is attributed to all the stages of production. So it's not a complex process. It's done in more than 150 countries, and we can do it as well.
As we conclude, just one final issue. Are you looking at an aggressive enlightenment campaign? Because many people would say if a lot of this discussion had been held in the public space before these bills went to the National Assembly, perhaps we wouldn't have these heated debates that are bordering on, very, very, very harsh environment.
You can never have too much consultations, and you should never continue to have consultations to the point where you can't get anything done. We've spent over 1 year and we've had consultations that we've lost counts with all groups. So we welcome more consultations, but it's not the reason why we shouldn't present the bills, because presenting the bills presents another opportunity to continue with the engagement. And there was a question of timing that is related to this. Yes. If you remove fuel subsidy and there's naira flotation and there's poverty in the land, what's the best time to provide relief for the people? It's like yesterday. The next best time is now. We don't have investment coming into our country. Nigerian companies are not investing. Some are closing down. The time to intervene and solve that problem, it's an emergency, to be honest. I think that we should prioritize. During COVID, there were countries where they were passing laws in 2 days. I think what we have now is equivalent to a COVID crisis for our economy, and we should take it with that priority. So it's not a rush, it's what this time calls for.
All right. And so on that note, we'll leave this conversation. Of course, the debate will continue, and the bills are before the National Assembly, and that's also another platform for examining them. But for this conversation, for now, we would have to leave it here and say thank you to Mr. Taiwo Oyedele, who is chairman of the Presidential Committee on Fiscal Policy and Tax Reforms. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Right, thank you. And thank you to all those who also called in to contribute. Next week, we'll be back with NTA Tuesday Live. I'm Cyril Stober. Bye for now.